Okay, 3, 2, 1.
All right, welcome everybody to Artful Tuesdays. Today I have Anne and Lisa, and we are going to be talking about Cyrano de Bergerac by Edmond Rostand and Leonard Peikoff's Discovering Great Plays, if you haven't gotten the book. So this is the final play that we're going to be talking about. And as Lisa pointed out before we did the recording, so Lisa, you said you were in the first 7 plays, a discussion or lecture series.
The first conference I ever attended, that was the lecture series that
it was an OCON.
Yeah, it was before there even was OCON. I think it was called something else, but yes, but it was only 7. It did not include Cyrano.
Yeah, so then he did, I guess, another version of it, and he added Cyrano. He did 8 great plays,
yes,
which is how I know it, as 8 great plays. So that's excellent. And so before we get started in discussing Cyrano de Bergerac and the play and everything, I just want to give like a very quick synopsis in case you don't know it. And then I'm hopefully Anne and Lisa will like criticize and tell me what I got wrong and all the little things. I want to try to get it really fast, just super broad. And again, if not read it, stay tuned. We're going to discuss it, but we'll give you some insights before you go into it. So basically, Cyrano de Bergerac is a play about a very outrageous man with a very big nose that he's self-conscious of, particularly with the opposite sex. So I already got to know. Yes. I'm going to keep going though. Let's keep going. So he falls in love with this woman who's very beautiful, but he's too self-conscious to tell her that he loves her. At the same time, another man, and they're both soldiers, another man who's very handsome falls in love with this woman. The problem is that the big nose man is very witty and great with words. The other man is dull and not great with words. So they're both falling in love with this very beautiful woman who also appreciates words and great poetic sensibilities. And the story is essentially their love triangle. There you go, 30 seconds synopsis. That's it. You don't ever have to watch Cyrano de Bergerac. What Kirk just did, done. That's the best synopsis.
Well, you got to watch.
So I got one head shake.
You got to watch the middle. You got to watch the beginning.
No, I know. It's
the reason
what's
why
the head
I
shake
my
for?
Head,
yeah, what
Kirk,
I did
was. Well, I think he's in a way proud of his nose. I mean, he has poetry about his nose, so he understands that it's perceived as ugly in a romance, for a girl. But Lisa, what would you like to add about the setup?
Oh yeah, I totally agree. So this is one of the great disputes that I end up in with people over this play, is whether or not he's insecure, whether or not he's self-conscious. And my shorthand way of describing my perspective on it is that he is insecure that the world, I don't even like putting it that way because I don't like saying he is insecure. I think of him as supremely secure. But what he's insecure about is that the world has the capacity to appreciate his nose. So I just see his nose as sort of being symbolic, as, I forget the word you first used to describe him, but he's larger than life. He is grand. He is extravagant. He's exaggerated. His proportions as a man as a human being, as a soul, are exaggerated. So the proportions of his nose are exaggerated too. But in the conventional world, this is thought of as unattractive. So he's conscious that other people will find this unattractive about him, but I think he thinks they're fools.
Well, I think the nose.
Well,
go ahead.
Very much a hero, right? He's a great swordsman. He's a brilliant poet. He poetizes extemporaneously during his fight right at Act 1. And so he is an extraordinarily positive person. And he's positive about his nose. But what Lisa said actually keys us into the end, and the sort of tragedy of it is the world isn't up to understanding what this greatness is and so on. But I'm sorry, Kirk, what were you going to say?
Well, no, so I think playing on that is important. So like the idea of Cyrano as a character and this nose, and I'd be curious because you two are probably way more versed in the reproductions than I am. I don't know, but perhaps. And I've seen some of them. I've seen, of course, the Jose Ferrar one, which is the one that everyone likes, and I do like it. I didn't watch the whole thing, but there was a French version not too long ago.
Gerard Depardieu.
Yeah, but I remember the thing that I remember most about this versus some of the other versions I've seen is the depiction of the nose. And the French one, the depiction of the nose was the way I think it should be done personally, which was very grotesque. And I liked that it had like a mole on it. It was really, so like the Jose Ferrar one, you don't like that, but the Jose Ferrar one was like, it was almost, it made me think, you know, it's just like a teeny little bit extra big of a nose, not even that big a deal. And it made the whole plot like less impressive to me versus like this really honker, so I could definitely sympathize more with Cyrano and his heroism and the real conflict when it's a real honker like that. But yeah, so Lisa again disagreed with me. So let's
wow, yeah, we're gonna get right into the heart of the
might as well
real disagreement. Okay, so first,
serious.
before I'm going to pause on that for a second and just say one thing I want to quickly say about your brief synopsis is that, so you described it as a love triangle, but what's truly, you know, innovative and fascinating and brilliant about the setup of this play is it's not really a triangle because it's not the two men vying against each other for the love of this one woman. Instead, the brilliance of it is that one of them decides his only opportunity to achieve intimacy and closeness with this woman is going to be to help the other corner of that triangle. It's going to be to be the words for the man who can't speak for himself. And so I do remember from Dr. Peikoff's course on this, that there was when he describes the plot theme, you probably have it there in front of you, but it's something about helping his own rival to seduce, to woo the woman that he loves. And just, if you can create a scenario like that, you've got a brilliant setup for a play of something where you're helping your own rival to win the woman that you love.
Well, so I don't have exactly what you were talking about, but one line here that I think is great is, you know, when Cyrano is trying to convince Christian to do the plot, basically, he says, and between us, we shall compose a hero of romance, a single hero of romance. So yeah. And that's why I thought you were kind of going with like, it's not really a tryst because they're two halves of a full romantic hero in a sense. At least also, that's one way of,
but also Cyrano is making the choice to, Christian is more like a pawn in all of, he's not the protagonist of the play, and he's just kind of going along with what's happening and doesn't really even understand within Cyrano what is motivating him until much later. So Cyrano is the one driving this, and I think the purpose is an opportunity to get as close as he can to Roxanne. And I think a big part of the motivation is he wants her to have her vision, what she envisions as her perfect man. There's the scene early on where they meet in the pastry shop, and she confesses that he thinks she's confessing her love for him, and it's tragic and terrible.
Yeah, it's horrible.
I
have done that. I have felt that before. That's happened to me for sure with a woman. I was like, oh my God, this poor guy.
I guess we're assuming that anyone listening to this has read it, because it's very hard to
we have to assume.
Quickly recapture all these scenes. But in that scene, my teenage students in their teenage lingo will always go, oh, friend zoned.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, definitely friend zoned. And he doesn't know it at first.
So at first he doesn't know, but then when she confesses that she's really in love with this man she's never met before, she's only seen his face across the theater and projected onto him her vision of the romantic hero, he says, well, what if his brain is as curly, he compliments his curly hair. He said, what if his brain is as curly as his hair? And she says, then I shall die. Well, that's for a man in love, that's quite a motivation to give her give her everything she desires in a man.
And-
I want
oh, go
to
ahead.
make some suggestions. We can talk about translations, but I do think starting with the Jose Ferrer movie is a great start. I am a Brian Hooker fan. I know some folks really like the Anthony Burgess version, which is okay. It's not terrible. But once you get into it, I have discovered that there is a very bad YouTube, kind of pixelated version of Derek Jacobi and Sinead Cusack doing this production, which I saw live too. Leonard saw it on Broadway, and it is spectacular. And even if you just get Derek Jacobi speaking of the lines, even if you're not into the video of it, it's quite wonderful.
Yeah, so I was gonna I guess we real quick do this real quick. I was gonna wait till the end to talk about translations, but yeah, so I read the Gertrude Hall, and like I said, I've seen some different, that's the one I've read the most. I don't know if I like it that much. I looked at other snippets of other ones I thought were better, but so I need to get into that. But I thought the Gertrude Hall one was sufficient, but there could be better ones.
Well, it's a great story. I mean, it's
exactly the story always shines through, and I've always said this about great romantic writers in translation is like, because I only read and speak English, I don't have any language skills, but there are some authors that just, no matter how bad the translation, they just shine through it. They just they kind of, like Hugo is like this, where I've read, people are like, what should I read? It's like, well, there's a couple versions that are good, but honestly, there's so many times I've just like read snippets from different translations and it's just been blown away, no matter how crappy I thought they might be. But so on translation, just read, if you haven't read the play, just read the play. There's a lot of great things about it. Now returning to the play though. So
wait, we haven't dealt with the nose yet.
I was going back to the nose. Yeah. So I want to go back to the nose, of what's happening with this nose. So like I said, I really like that it's this grotesque nose. Lisa, you seem to shake your head about the grotesqueness of the nose. So like the Jose Ferrer one is not that, I think it's.
Oh, you should look at it again. It's
like
huge.
That's not that bad.
Yeah, but look at the image that we have on YouTube.
Yeah.
You gotta
I know.
see it.
That one, yeah, that's bigger for sure. The one on YouTube.
It's the same nose.
But it's so much, it's more humorous than, it makes me think of Steve Martin's Roxanne, versus like I want it to have some grossness, a little bit of grossness to it, just because like he has to overcome something. But okay, why does that kill you? Why?
Nothing about Cyrano can be gross. It's exaggerated. I think exaggerated. The way I said it at the beginning, I want to say again, because I think that's the way to capture it, is that he's a man beyond the normal human proportions. That's why I found it a little bit ironic that the new movie version had a man of short stature, which could theoretically have worked. I don't think it did in this particular version, but I think stylized, exaggerated, disproportionate in a way that sets him outside of conventional society is important, but not grotesque. He's not supposed to be disgusting in some way. It's just something that's outside of convention in a way that is off-putting to people. But the thing is, I think of it as very parallel to his refusal to alter one comma in the plays he writes. It's in conventional society, you compromise with the patron and you show a little bit of willingness, and there's not this kind of exaggerated dimension to your moral stature too. So I just first of all, I think the reason that I cringe at the idea of making it grotesque is that I think we are all, and I think people did, meant to fall completely head over heels in love with this character. We're not meant to find him repulsive. We're just meant to see that there's something about him that puts him at odds with conventional society. So I wouldn't want that undermined in I think making it that, yes, it's very, very clearly exaggerated, but not gross.
Well, I will say that opening, when you meet him, you
Mhm.
get that swashbuckling opening. I mean, it's just a brilliant construction. And
Mhm.
Kirk, I don't know if this will interest you, but when we did the production, we did it with a Black actor. But I was like, well,
At
let's
Ocon.
work on Mark's.
You're talking
No,
about-
we did it with a
No,
white
no,
actor
when
at
you did it
Ocon.
on
But
stage.
Oh, okay.
when I did it here in Austin with Austin
Mm.
Shakespeare, and I wanted it to model his nose, and it wasn't grotesque enough. It wasn't big enough.
You know,
So we wound up making a bunch of prostheses. So he used to have a necklace of noses because he had a variety. But you have to make it very large on stage because he's a very large personality.
mhm. Yeah, so you'd have to be able
Yeah.
to notice that it's exaggerated. Yeah.
Well, it seems like the nose can also be a place where the director can really make a statement, right?
Mhm.
Like, and that's in terms of like what you're trying to get across. So, like you can make it humorous, where it is like a Roxanne, like Steve Martin's version, where it is this like floppy little. I don't know if you've seen that movie, but it's like a floppy little thing that just, and it, versus the French one that I saw, where he does have like a mole on it. It's like a big nose with like a black mole, I think, or something like that. It was. But I see what you're
But
saying. I
what's
still
comic about Cyrano himself is not comic, right? There's comedy, and he makes the comedy, but you don't laugh.
oh
at
him. Yeah, he's not funny. Yeah, I mean there's nothing humorous that you laugh at him to
Mhm.
If you have a
metaphysically cut
floppy
him down.
nose, that's not.
Yeah. But he's very funny and he's very witty and he makes you laugh. And
Yes,
yeah, there's times when I
yes.
definitely laugh at the things he says, or when he cuts down some, doofus who can't
Popin'
make fun of his
Jay, yeah.
nose. I always, that scene is amazing where he makes fun of his own deformity type thing in a way that's no one's good enough to do it. And this
Yeah.
is something that Peikoff talks about in the Discovering Great Plays book, or the series of lectures you could find on the Ayn Rand campus app. And he talks about the idea that, because he was trying to get into Rostand's head, Peikoff, in a sense, trying to think about how can he justify this metaphysical deformity with this great hero, and how does he interact in the world in that way? And the only way to make him still a great hero is that he is the best at making these comic jests, and he can defend it. So he can attack it, he could defend it, he could be wittier than everybody else, and he does all of that. And I when I reread it again, I definitely saw him doing all that stuff, and I personally like that because we all have our little picadillos in a sense that were of our own.
Well, we should say he
Some
is
of
a
us do, maybe not all
real
of us, but-
character in history, right?
Well, that too.
There
Yeah.
was a Cyrano de Bergerac. Now, the actor that originated this role, Coquelin or Coque, was a great actor at doing tirades. So
Mm.
he's writing for a person who can do this supremely well. The French, if they like your speech, they'll make you repeat the speech.
Mm.
Okay, and there was a tremendous ovation. It went on for 20 minutes or 40 minutes or something after this play. And before the play, Rostand comes to his cast and he says, "I'm so sorry, I've given you a really bad play, and I'm apologizing before you start for what I've done." And of
Mhm.
course, it's a huge hit, but he didn't know that. He just wrote from his heart.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, there's some things about the nose, and I think it is an interesting debate about what you perceive it, and because it's relevant to, I think, the deeper issue in the play, right? Obviously, it's not an accident that he made this. It's not some minor issue, and how you develop your character in relation to this nose, or in relation to this one thing, I think is really important. Now, before we move on to something else, I do want to point out some super chats we're getting. We're getting a few.
Oh,
So
wow,
thank
thank
you,
you.
everybody. Jeff Bannister and Gian Nicolini. And we actually have a question from Jeff Bannister on another one. So maybe this will be an interesting kickoff. When Cyrano realizes Roxanne's superficial attraction to Christian, he takes the self-interested choice to express his love through him. At least he would know that part was him. So one of the other questions I was going to ask is, about selfish versus selfless, which Peikoff talks about, because I did a podcast episode with a friend of mine from San Antonio who's a Catholic, and he loves this play. And we were talking about it, and I think it's even on ARC UK. We talked about it for quite a while, and we talked about like his character, and he said that this was the epitome of a great selfless man. And we had this whole thing about like selfless versus selfish, and what is this selfless? But you know, Peikoff talks about this, how many people categorize Cyrano as a selfless lover, as a selfless person. He's, you know, it's not for him, it's for Roxanne and for Christian. And it's, so I was just curious what you guys think about this debate. I mean, I think we all would be on the same page of where we would land, but just where this is coming from, why you think it's, you know, is there any plausibility or
I
you know,
think
just
it
your thoughts on
starts out
selfishness?
this, you know, using his skill to make her happy. But then what happens to him is he receives bliss, right? It's his words, right? And I think it turns into something profoundly selfish. I do want to get to, before we end today, Peikoff's interpretation of the theme. It's a very interesting interpretation of the theme. But Lisa, what would you say about selfish versus selfless?
What is the argument that there's selflessness? I don't even know.
Well, he
what
gives up, he doesn't go after the girl, and he supports his opponent, like you said, which seems like something contrary to what you just, and he explicitly wants to love her.
There is nothing ever
giving
said
up.
at any point in the play to suggest that his motivation is to help Christian. That's not his
No, but he
motivation.
does help
He
him.
does, but that's not the motivation. The motivation is what would make it selfish or not. I think
Mhm.
this is the best way.
Well, that's what selfless is, right? It's like, I may want this I may be motivated to want this thing, but nevertheless, I give it up. Isn't that what selfless
But
is?
his desire is to
Why?
make
It
her
depends
happy.
why you give it up. His desire to make her happy, I would say, is entirely selfish. He loves her. He wants her to be happy. But I also think that that's just one component of it. So it is his opportunity to give her true hero of romance. She wants her hero of romance. Okay, this is how I can provide her for that. But the emphasis is never even on that. The emphasis is never on, this is how I can make Roxanne happy, although I think there are elements of that. The emphasis is on, this is how he can get his words to her. This is the best opportunity he has. And when he stands beneath that balcony, he relishes every little bit of intimacy that he can soak up in that moment. And at that, I mean, one of my favorite lines in the whole play is that when he takes Christian's place and pushes him to the side, but is still pretending to be Christian, and he feels the branches trembling, the jasmine vines trembling, and that's the closest he'll ever come to feeling her tremble, and even kisses them. It's the closest he'll come to kissing her. But he says at that point, now let me die, having lived. That's the closest he's come to true living the joy that he wants of experiencing love with Roxanne. So,
And it's he keeps saying, it's my words.
yeah, my words on her lips, on his lips. Yeah.
So I definitely lean toward it's selfish, like you're saying, because again, for me, I know you don't like he lacks confidence, but he does he does have a barrier between his desire, his ability to express his love explicitly to her, and that and so in a sense that stops him from being able to do that. Anyway, so here's another thing that about the selfish selfless.
Can I say one quick thing about that?
Yeah,
so when he says to his opponent in the duel, know that I glory in this nose of mine, I don't think that's bluster. I don't think he's just talking. I think he does glory in this. And like you with that concavity, there's no personality to your face. Look at me. I have this great nose. But at the same time, in that first act, he says, sometimes I dream of love and then I see my shadow on the wall. But it's not, I see my shadow on the wall and I hate my own profile. It's I see my shadow on the wall and I'm reminded this is not what women respond to romantically. And I've talked about this in other contexts, but I just want to introduce it here, that there are these repeated references to the moon, and the moon is where he's going to find Galileo, and that's where he's going to find Socrates, and that's where he's going to find the unappreciated geniuses, the uncompromising visionaries who were scorned in this world, but that they are there on the moon, and that's where he's going to find his people. So I just always think of it as, here on Earth, Roxanne is the best of what there is, but she's not a moon person. She's not able to appreciate what it is that's so.
He doesn't know that because she is a moon person. She becomes a moon person toward the end. I mean, that's the thing, is like, I think he's making assumptions about her at the beginning, and we have no evidence that this is the case, except that she does fall in love with a beautiful man. But why wouldn't she fall in love with a beautiful man? Because she assumed that he had a heroic soul and he is brave, but she assumed he had the wit, because she believed, she, in her world, it's an integration. And that's where you said earlier she would die if she found out it wasn't, if they found out that wasn't true.
If you
connection.
If you think that if he had just confessed his love from the outset, she would have returned it and they would have been happily ever after, then absolutely you have to conclude that he's insecure and that's why he doesn't do that. So, but I don't share that premise at all. And the reason is that first of all, she says, so when we get to Act 4, she says to Christian, I finally figured it out. After all your letters coming across the Spanish lines daily with these words that just went straight into my soul, I finally figured it out. It's not your face I love. Took all that time, took all that time to realize it wasn't his face. It was his words. It's not your face I love. It's your soul. And I'd love you even if you were ugly. And that's when Christian decides, you got to say this, Cyrano, you have to tell her now, because she's explicitly said she would love me even if I was ugly. And then she sees Cyrano and says, I would love him even if he were, and he says, the word comes hard before me, doesn't it? And it's so easy for her to say when she's not confronted with the reality. But it's harder to say when she is.
Okay, interesting.
And that's true in the final scene too.
Yeah.
She's so I think it is maybe possible that Roxanne could have loved Cyrano after the ruse, after.
Well, I want to say something about, I think she matures in the play.
Yeah.
Because time goes by. She's a girl. Now she's an intellectual, right? She reads all and a lot, but she's young. And by the end of the play, and remember who plays this role? Sarah Bernhardt. So you've got to think of the arc that he gave her for her journey, so that now it is a heroic tragedy, and we should get into that. But I think she changed. I think she actually develops.
Yeah, his love helps her to grow.
Well, I would go even broader than that, because I agree with all that. I do not think that if you were to just say, hey, yo, I love you, she'd be like, okay. Like it's a process. And part of what I saw in rereading it, and I've seen this before, is just the role of romance in all of our lives. So there's other characters that bring this out, right? So there's the pastry chef Ragueneau, or how you pronounce his name, but where he is, he seems so uplifted by Cyrano, and he admires Cyrano so dramatically, and that kind of almost draws out his poetry that he puts on his. And there's this wonderful scene where he's like writing his poems on, on the wrapping paper, and he's trying to find which one to give to a customer, and he's like, "I'll take this one from Achilles, or from Troy. I don't remember which, from this Apollonius and all these different. And he's like, you know what, forget it. I'll just give you an extra 3 patties, and you could just take that. And then the little boy's like, I'll leave. I just love that scene. And there's that I think throughout all of it, where there's even in the first act, a musketeer, D'Artagnan comes and says, good. So there's actual characters from literature there, which to me is, when I saw that, I think of like the Western American hero. If like you have a Western movie and you have John Wayne coming in and in your movie, and he's like, partner, but he just goes on, right? It's just like, it's a kind of nod to that heroism that you're a part of that I really like. But I thought like
it's D'Artagnan who compliments him on his swordsmanship.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Which is even better is like, the greatest swordsman in French history type thing is like saying, it's like a great cowboy saying, good shooting, partner, like that kind of thing. Like, but what I saw throughout the whole thing was the role of admiration, uplift. This is what Cyrano wants. Like his last line is, I did it for my white plume, and so much like there's a scene where he even inspires his enemy, De Guiche, at one point, if you guys remember, which I love again. So he inspires him, and he's like, and it's through his, like there's a couple of scenes before where De Guiche is talking about this masterful plan that was really practical, but he left his scarf to kind of ploy the enemy. And, so basically this is a big no. You don't leave your white scarf, right? This is part of your assemblage. And
it indicates the rank.
And okay. Thank you.
It is rank, and it made him a target. So he threw it off so that he'd no longer be a target, and then he could lead his troops to victory. Because he wouldn't be targeted and killed. Yeah,
and so long story short, but Cyrano actually has it because he's been going out like 5 times a day, not really, but quite a day, going through enemy lines to draw these letters to his to.
But
Roxanne.
I do want to point out, even De Guiche, though, in the end, in Act 5, is made better.
Well, that's what I was saying. That's my point,
right.
Is that Cyrano inspired him, and so when Roxanne is there and they're about to be ambushed by everybody and all of them die, and instead of De Guiche like running off and doing another thing, he says, give me a musket. And he goes out to, and then Cyrano gives him praise. And he's like, all right, there we go. So I think, my point is that I think there's a role throughout this whole story, if not a major theme, of inspiring you to better action and to a better way of looking at the world, which I think is relevant to Roxanne's process, where she, through all these letters, through the windows, the balcony scene, and all these things, she does mature. She does come to this other conclusion, this new way of thinking, which she can fall in love with a man who's got a big nose.
Yeah. And I do want to clarify one thing. They've known each other since childhood. So she does know him very, very well. It's not that she wouldn't have loved him when he first proclaimed his love because she didn't really know him at all. It would have been, she would not have found him attractive. She was looking for the hero of romance who and dominantly, she was looking for the physical because she fell madly in love before she'd spoken one word.
That's a good point.
Now, she did have a certain expectation, and her expectations were disappointed when he tried his hand at speaking to her without Cyrano's prompting. But the emphasis was on the physical attractiveness. So I think when he realizes she's madly in love with an exceptionally handsome man, he knows that he does not stand a chance with her. So I think it's not that she didn't know him, and then once she knows him, it's that he really had an opportunity to show her, and this integrates with what I think both of you are saying, to really show her what love is. And she grew through the process of reading his letters to be able to have access to a person's soul and to really see what true love looks like. So by the end, I think she might have loved him, but earlier on, I don't think she had the capacity to. So I don't think he withheld that love because he was insecure. I think he knew it would not be returned.
You don't think she loves him in that last scene?
Yeah, I do think. I think she loves him then.
when
Yeah.
when he reveals.
Yeah.
So I do want to bring up Leonard's thing about the world versus Cyrano.
Mhm.
So that's Leonard's crack of this play, right?
Yeah.
Is that it's really about the world, in a sense, is not good enough.
Mhm.
So the people that Lisa brought up that, he will meet on the moon are people who failed in the world,
Mhm.
but were greater. And
Mhm.
that's Dr. Peikoff's point, which I think is a really interesting one, that it's, in a sense, the world isn't good enough. And
Mhm.
that's part of the heart-wrenching tragedy.
You have to
Yeah.
make a choice between idealism and practical success. That's a metaphysical alternative in this universe. You can't have both.
But it does seem like in contemplation, he could have had both, right? Like when I think about it, like it's true within the logic of the play, but that to me is one of the mistakes that Cyrano makes, is that he thinks he can't have both, but I think he maybe can. I don't know. Do you agree?
Well, the
do you
audience
disagree or
is
agree?
rooting for him.
Oh, I'm definitely, I'm rooting for him majorly.
The audience is like, no,
Yeah,
tell her.
exactly. Maybe it's just wishful
but
thinking.
But in terms of what the play expresses,
Yeah.
I think the play expresses he was beyond that.
He was beyond it.
Because it's not, the romance is the focal point of the plot, but it's integrated into every aspect of his life. So he says, another of my favorite lines is, "I've missed everything, even my own death."
Mhm.
Because he imagines dying in battle, sword in my hand and laughter on my lips. That's how he pictures himself dying. How does he actually die? Being ambushed by a lackey who drops a log on his head. So it's just kind of humiliating, and there's no glory to it. And it's so he dies. His death is ignoble. He dies in poverty. Moliere is stealing credit for the lines that he wrote, and they're getting the laughter while he lives, doesn't have enough money to buy food. So it's
He does fail on every front.
He fails in every realm of life, because that's the consequence of being an idealist and of staying true to yourself. You die with pride, with your panache, with your white plume, but with lack of practical success. But quickly, sorry, I'm sorry if I'm monopolizing now. I said I wasn't prepared, and then I can't stop talking about the play. But I just
Why we love you. Come on, bring
De
it.
Guiche at the end. De Guiche has everything. He has a title. He is dressed extravagantly. He is well fed. He's got it all. And he says, I feel jealous of Cyrano. When you have a life like mine, you feel somehow 1,000 small displeasures with yourself. So Cyrano dies with a pure conscience and a real, we were just talking about selfishness versus a true sense of self and identity and pride in who he is and what he's done. And De Guiche feels like, I've been, I've kind of compromised, and I'm left with a lot of fancy robes, but not much to show for myself.
No, I think that's one of the most important points.
One of the things we've talked about on these shows, Lisa, are other plays that are worthwhile that have been lost. Part of what Leonard Peikoff has given us here is all of these treasures of Ibsen and Shaw and Sophocles and so on. But that in the treasure chest of Rostand, there are quite a number of plays worth reading. So would you inspire Kirk?
Well, yes. So I have done one in my Read With Me app, which is called The Romantics. And The Romantics is hilarious and adorable and takes on the question of what does it mean to be a romantic. I love how consistent Rostand is. He just likes exploring in so many different forms what it is to be an idealist and to be a romantic. The Romantics, Kirk, have Have you read that?
No, I haven't
one?
read that one yet. I'm going to, but yeah, I've only read
you have-
Chanticleer.
You have read
and-
Chanticleer.
Oh,
Okay.
many times. I've loved it for many years. And then Cyrano, of course. But I love
Have I given you the quick setup for the Romantics? Because I think it's one of the most brilliant.
No,
opening-
I don't think so, but yeah, maybe. but-
Okay. Well, so the setup for the Romantics is two young lovers whispering across a wall. Their fathers are feuding. You know, it sounds like a
Pyramus
cliche,
and Thisbe.
right? Pyramus and Thisbe, Romeo and Juliet. Their fathers are feuding, but they're defying their fathers and they're in love. And so then all this happens right at the beginning, so it's not a big plot spoiler. So we see them reading Romeo and Juliet. He's reading Romeo and Juliet to her across the wall.
Yeah.
And then next scene, we see the two fathers approach the wall, meet, and embrace each other and say, "Weren't we clever for pretending to feud so that our children would marry?"
I think I have heard this. Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I think
So-
you've said that. That's
And
I have
then
heard- yeah,
it
yeah,
just
yeah.
gets
That's
more
a great
brilliant
setup.
and hilarious
Yeah.
from there. So, but it also takes on a real theme of what does it really mean to be a romantic?
Well, so I think it's interesting about Rostand in general, like, reading into an author. So I've only read the two, and yeah, I have heard you say that before, and thank you for reminding me because that's wonderful.
Mhm.
And there's something, so, Anne, you were saying earlier about the theme that Peikoff brings up, where it's him, where it's the world isn't good enough for him in a sense, right? And I thought that's interesting that he chose Cyrano de Bergerac, the character, who it seems was similar in that sense, where his work was published after he died, right? Like, so it's almost like even the character itself is an embodiment of what he was trying to convey, and maybe that's what attracted him, Rostand the writer, to this historical character that he's writing about, which is a historical character. I've long time ago when I took a course on science fiction, I actually read From Other Worlds by de Bergerac, and it's interesting. Like, if you really, have you read that by any chance, Lisa? I would recommend it actually for, I don't know, at least like there's excerpts, because it seems like Rostand even pulled stuff out of this, and like
Oh,
even
sure, sure.
from his actual book, and
The
you know,
ways
just
to get to the
Well,
Yeah,
I should say,
ways to get
Sue
to the
Lloyd,
moon.
a friend of Lisa, has a book about Rostand called "The Man
Oh.
Who Was Cyrano."
yeah.
That's well worth reading.
Well, that is about the people, about Rostand himself and how he
Mhm.
was a Cyrano. Yeah, so that's something that go ahead, Lisa. I was gonna
no,
build on that a little
that-
bit.
Yeah,
but
please do.
It seems like that's like one of Rostand's messages, just from what I know from reading multiple times Cyrano and Chanticleer, which is my extent of knowledge of Rostand, is his obsession with, especially in a time when this is dying out in the world, I think, and this is late 1900s, this is right, because he dies like right after World War One, and so you have this you have basically a post-Victorian era. You have the hero, people are questioning. You have this modern world, and you have this happening in a lot of genres. Even in America, this is happening with the the Western hero. Like, what's the value of it? And you have these people writing dime novels trying to reemerge with like, here's this Western hero and what he's all about. And you have it here in the French version, which I really liked, of like, this is what our hero is, and he's like the best hero of all of them. In a certain sense, like this is the epitome of it, and he's so obsessed with like almost not obsessed, but maybe it's obsessed, but it feels to me like there is a practical role for this stuff, right? It's not just old stories we tell kids for no reason. Like, I really got a lot of practicality, and one of them is, I've already said, is the kind of the role of admiration in uplifting your life and living a better life and taking on that challenge that you're too scared to take on. And I don't know if you guys saw that as I know that's a kind of historical perspective on this, but
Oh, I think that's why the audience was standing and applauding, was they
Mhm.
were inspired. And there's no way, we have all sorts of modern stuff that's trying to push this play down,
Mhm.
and you can't,
yeah,
because it is
shines
it
through.
is an inspiring story.
Yeah, I mean, I don't I've read Sue Lloyd's biography more than once, but I don't feel like I have a really clear sense of what it was about Rostand himself that made him accept this dichotomy between idealism and romance and practical success. I mean, that is a very entrenched view in
Mhm.
culture, I think, that there's a choice between the two. And I just love that he made it, but at the same time, there's that kind of entrenched dichotomy, but he's got a guy who's an expert swordsman who can kill 100 men single-handedly. And so there is a very pronounced element of practicality in one sense. He's not just this kind of head in the clouds visionary dreamer. He's extraordinarily efficacious too. He doesn't get to reap the rewards of his prowess. That's the source of the dichotomy. But I just, to your point, I was just thinking that in my lecture this summer, which I know both of you heard, I mentioned that he gave a talk at his alma mater and he wrote a poem for them. And the opening line of the poem is, "My advice to you is be little Cyrano's."
Mhm.
So he certainly was presenting this character as somebody for us all to emulate and worship. And he was extraordinarily successful at that.
Yeah. Yeah. I
And
mean, it's
Lisa,
not,
before we end, I want to ask about your students. So you teach this play regularly. What ages are the kids who read it?
They're about 13. It's 8th grade.
That's
Mhm.
kind of perfect.
They
And how,
love it. Infallibly, absolutely love it. You've both heard this story too, but maybe there's somebody out there listening who hasn't, that one of my students at the end of the play threw the book down and said, "You've ruined me for romance. I'll never find a man like Cyrano de Bergerac."
well, and that kind of almost sounds like what Rostand was trying to say is like, you know, the world, maybe like she may be missing, maybe she agrees with Rostand or maybe she missed that part of like, maybe he is out there. Don't give up so easily. Because that, I mean, to me, that's part of what I see too, is like through all the struggles that Cyrano goes through, you know, there is the question of like, is it worth it? And to me, it's definitely yes. And like you pointed out, the De Guiche example is to, you know, for what I got out of it is like, if I lived my life true to myself, even if I failed in all realms, better to fail alone than, you know, which he has that famous "no thank you" speech, which I actually did in college for an acting class, stupidly.
Great.
No, because it's so hard to deliver, like when you're not an actor. I don't know what I was doing.
Sure.
I was like embarrassed as hell. And I also did the Roxanne scene where they read the letter together with one of the other. Oh, so bad. And Rostand would have like rolled in his grave and said, "Stop." Anyway, so I think there's, you know, that kind of element of holding on to that image of Cyrano for me and failing in all these different ways, and life is still going to be worth it. Like it's now, I think we should have the material successes. I think that's possible, and we get a Howard Rourke, you know, 100 years later, or like, you know, 80 years later, whatever, and where you see both of them really beautifully put together as possible. But, you know, this is still an era where I think it was maybe a more of an open question. It was still difficult. I mean, I'll just say like one, you know, we'll wrap up here pretty soon, but there's there's this guy is his historian, Dan Carlin. I don't know if you guys have heard of him. He does these really intense 4 or 5 hour long podcasts that are very well researched. He reads like 20 books for one of these podcasts. And he's one of the most popular podcasters in that sense, called Hardcore History. And he does one on the beginning of World War I. And he tells these stories of these men, these Europeans who go out in their full, you know, attire on their horses and just get mowed down by gunfire. It's just like instant. They just like, they're getting slaughtered. And they're like trying to be this honor, like this, yes, I'm this French hero, whatever. But it doesn't work in this new world where you have Gatling guns and machine guns, and they're just getting slaughtered. And there's this like transformation in how the world kind of operates and thinks of itself, where that kind of, you know, thing is not practical in a sense. Like it's not, you can't fight a war like that. And I just always think of that of like, you know, that in terms of the historical moment that's happening with Rostand. And I think Rand is so much more correct about the end of Romanticism than I think, many other historians who usually say it's like 1850 is the end of Romanticism that I've read from, and she said it was Rostand's death. And yeah, I think that's interesting.
But it's great that she sees, she has those little points that she'll pick up through the 20th century, that Romanticism doesn't die as a movement, it dies, but that she's really carrying the banner.
Yeah, it's not dead at all, because Rand is alive, and we have U2 doing it. It's still there, and you see snippets of it. I mean, I always think, even though I think most of these are terrible, but there's so, like, Netflix just did a Cyrano de Bergerac, like, not retelling. I don't want to call it a retelling. What do they call it? Like a reimagining, where it's like a high school girl who's kind of ugly and big or whatever, and it's the same kind of thing where she helps one of her friends fall. And I've seen that story's been done over and over again, and I think it's unfortunate and kind of horrible how they mangle it, but I feel like there's still something where they're trying to hold on to some romanticism that's like one little nugget there. I know you don't
feel like
agree
they're
with that.
trying to use it.
Well,
But-
yeah, they're
but,
definitely trying to
you
use, because, but I'm saying, like, there's something in all of us that still wants that romanticism, I guess, is we haven't gone into cynicism completely as a culture.
One other thing about the just inspiration and applicability of Cyrano. So yes, he dies. His life was sort of in vain, as he puts it, that he was not able in any realm of his life to reap the rewards of his exceptional talents. But as a reader reading it, who doesn't share the premise that idealism is at odds with practical success, I don't share that premise. And yet I come away from that play with a total sense of uplifting inspiration. And I think the reason is that on a small scale, we face those challenges, all of us, all the time. So even if we don't accept on the whole that staying true to yourself is going to involve losses in some way, if we don't buy that on the whole, there are always going to be cases where that's true in the short run. So having this vision of a man who stays true to himself despite the consequences is a great vision to have to carry us through those times. And one of my favorite, you said that the inspiration is one of the things you respond to the most. I just love the character of Lebray, his best friend, who is the practical man and is the conventional man and wants so desperately for Cyrano to experience some success in the world, but he wants him to compromise in order to achieve it. And for Cyrano, it's not worth the price. But I just love the character, the character at his side who absolutely worships him and tries to, he's not trying to influence him negatively. He just worships him so much that he wants to see him
Succeed.
Yeah.
No, I think that's great. There's and you need the fuel. Cyrano could be the fuel to be that inspiration for you in real life. And that's, to me, the practicality. There's a line that Cyrano says when all the Gascons are starving, they're sleeping, but they're feasting while they sleep, is what the leader says. And when they wake up and they start complaining and they're all going to die, and he says, feast on the Iliad, which of course I love, because I love the Iliad, but just the idea of like, and there's this thing of food all the time, right? From the very beginning, when he eats like a little grape, and that's his dessert, and he has like, and there's this whole thing of that element of life, of like the physical material, that's just done very beautifully in the dichotomy that you've been talking about of the split between maybe the world's not good enough. And then again, like Ragueneau, I love the character Ragueneau, like you like Lebret, because he's so poetic with his food and his poetry, and he has a rhymed poem of his recipe, which is fun. And
that is really true about the theme of food, because the idea is better to feed your soul than your body. So that's true. That's true even with the Ragueneau. because he runs a pastry shop. So it's all about feeding the body. But the conflict between him and his wife is that he's giving the stuff away for free. So
Yeah.
so he's losing materially.
Well,
Well, he values the poetry more,
Because he
right?
Exactly, values the poetry
Smart.
more, but you're going to go out of
Right.
business. So like my
Right.
dad had a bakery and they went out of business because the owner, like he was a co-owner, and they're, you know, these two Italian guys, and he was the owner, the main owner, was just so like, oh yeah, come in, buddy. Yeah, have a sandwich, have a soda. And it's just like, we were like, what are you doing, man? You can't do that. And we, that eventually went out of business. And there is that dichotomy of that world. Okay, so I think any last thoughts? If you guys wanted, there's one. I don't know if you've ever heard this poem, "Never Seek to Tell Thy Love" by William Blake. Have you heard that, either of you? So this is what I think of when I think, and we don't have to talk about it because we're basically on time, but maybe something to contemplate afterwards. It's very short, but it's what I think about. It's not 100% accurate of what's going on in my view, but similar to kind of the fear, a certain kind of fear that I see Cyrano having, that has going on there. And I can't share the screen, but I'll just read it really quickly. It's called "Never Seek to Tell Thy Love" by William Blake. But first, before I do that, did you guys have any closing remarks on Cyrano?
Just would love to encourage people to read Leonard's literature as philosophy, and his love of theater and Rostand's love of theater is very much part of this play, Cyrano de Bergerac.
Absolutely. Okay, so real quick, here's the poem. Thank you for indulging me.
Oh, there it is.
Never seek to tell thy love. Love that never told can be. For the gentle wind does move silently, invisibly. I told my love, I told my love. I told her all my heart, trembling, cold, in ghastly fears, as she doth depart. Soon as she was gone from me, a traveler came by, silently, invisibly. Oh, was no deny. All right, everybody. Go check out that poem. I love William Blake. There's a lot. He's always has something interesting to say. But thank you, Lisa. Everybody
Thank you
go
for
check out
doing
Read
this,
With
Kurt.
Me.
We might be back with an Ayn Rand play.
Yes. Yeah. So hopefully we will be continuing this in a different version, even though we're done with the 8 great plays. But thank you, Lisa. Remember, everybody go check out Read With Me and Chikalala. Check out Austin Shakespeare. So thank you, everybody. And